Good day and greetings from the Great White North. My name is Prickly Poo and welcome to day 90 of a year of change. This has been a bit of a strange week. We've sort of gotten off track as to what this originally was intended to do, which was a weight loss thing. But we're going to end things off in the same vein. Monday we talked about just how we have a tendency just to eat just because food is there. Wednesday I ate a bug, which was... I haven't eaten any more since then, just so you know. I did take it to work, and I had two other people try it. Both women, by the way. The guys wouldn't try it. They were too scared. But there were two women there that did try them, and again, tasted like nothing. So, but in keeping with that, that's what I wanted. I sort of touched on this on Wednesday as well, and that's sort of what I want to bring this week to the documentary. Now, the documentary this week isn't really so much about weight loss or being too fat or being too thin or health or anything like that. It does sort of tie in with a lot of that stuff that we have been talking about throughout the week, though. Mainly insects for food. Now, and this is why this has sort of gotten off topic, but it kind of is linked somehow. And if you'll follow me along with my thought process, you'll understand. Maybe, unless I don't explain it properly. So... basically, I mean, part of the reason why we're fat isn't just the quantity of food, but it's the type of food that we eat. We eat a lot of high-fat foods, lots of sugar, very calorie-dense foods, and we don't really do a lot to sort of burn off all those calories. And in the vast majority of the world, I think it's somewhere around 80% of the world, they eat a lot of insects. They also do a lot of physical labor. So there's a reason why the West is sort of the fat part of the world. Europe is getting there as well, though. But when they're, constantly expending energy, whether it's for working or whatever they do for recreation, things like that, trying to get nutrition is very, very tough. So they don't have the same amount of, just grazing land that we can use for beef and chickens and pork and other stuff. I'm trying to think of the other animals. Those are the main three. Beef, chicken, pork, I think are the top three. So they'll pretty much get it wherever they can get it. And in a lot of countries, it's insects. They're very high protein. Those are about as calorie dense as you can get. Some of them they have a lot of calories because they're fatty, which is one of those things that I'm kind of grateful that the worms and the crickets that I tried weren't creamy. I guess the best way to put it. I didn't want something that was, like a chocolate-covered cherry popping in my mouth. So that's what they tend to go for. And there's not that same aversion that we have to it when they're eating them. It's just sort of part of their culture. It's for the vast majority of the world. We have something similar, which is kind of odd, because we still eat other arthropods. We eat like shrimp or lobster, crabs, like gigantic versions of what is essentially the same makeup as an insect. But for some reason, we're really averse to eating the insect itself. And I'm not sure where that comes from. I'm the same way. I live on the East Coast, where lobster is aplenty, and we think nothing of it. Same thing with crab and shrimp and any other seafood, like scallops or clams or any of that stuff, that we have no problem eating that. But the thought of eating a bug is just one of those things that really turns it. Turns it? I don't know what that means. Turns our stomach. There we go. I just assumed you knew what I was talking about. So, it's more of a cultural thing than anything else. You can go to other countries, and it's just sort of just part of everyday life there. And I'm not talking about going out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the wilderness, where people are, hunting giant spiders and everything else. I mean, these are in major cities all across the world. The majority of people actually do eat insects. So, on top of the cultural thing, though, this documentary also... Can't talk. This documentary also talks about the resources that are required to raise cattle and pork and everything else. Cattle and livestock, I should have said. It's like cow and beef and pork and pig and chicken, poultry. Here we go. Couldn't think of the word. Anyway, so there's you can find these stats all over the internet that it'll show you exactly how much water and land and everything else it takes to raise a pound of beef or a pound of chicken or a pound of pork or anything like that. It's a little skewed because not everyone measures it the same way. For example, you can say, okay, well, here's how much water it takes to raise a pound of beef. Well, then, are you taking into account just the water that the cow is drinking? Do you take into account the water that it took to grow the original food that the cow is eating as well, like the feed? Do you count the land that it's grazing on? I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Depending on how far back you go, it ranges anywhere from 1,000 gallons to 18,000 gallons per pound of beef. So the numbers aren't really accurate. But it gives you an idea as to, roughly if you were to take and just say, okay, we aren't including the food it's eating or the land or anything else. This is just water that it consumes per pound. Then this isn't the real number. We'll say like 1,000 gallons of water. When it comes to insects, you feed them whatever they would normally eat. Vegetation, the majority of them are herbivores anyway. So feed them the vegetation, but they can get the same amount of moisture or the required amount of moisture that they need just from things like something with a lot of water in it, like apples. So you chop up an apple, that is their water source. So it takes a lot less resources just to sort of breed these. Plus, you can have 10 or 20,000 at a time in a very, very small place. So they're very, I don't want to say compact, very space efficient. Yeah, it's close enough. So, I mean, people have looked at that as well. When I was looking this up and just sort of going through different topics and things like that, there were things I wanted to touch on, but one that sort of came out, which I never really thought of, and it was one of those, the dangers of farming insects for food. And I had naturally thought, okay, well, there's going to be something like allergies, if you're allergic to bees, obviously you can't eat bees and things like that. But there is a group of people, and in hindsight, you can sort of see where they're coming from. That's basically PETA for bugs. Saying that there has to be a humane way of disposing of insects or slaughtering them, for lack of a better term. Because unlike a mammal, their nervous system is a little bit different. You can't just go, poof, and shoot them in the head and it's fine. So a lot of people have said, you can just freeze them. And then people say, no, that's not humane. It's very cruel. And of course, there are some arguments going, they can't feel pain the same we do, which they don't really know. So you would think they would want to sort of err on the side of caution. And I know it's just a bug. You've probably killed 10 of them this week, just like slapping mosquitoes or hitting a fly with a fly swatter. You don't think of it. But when you think, okay, on a grand scale, I suppose you can sort of understand where that aspect is coming from as well. So they don't really touch on that in the documentary, but it was something I thought was very interesting, is that there is a group of people, there is a group that is their cause, I guess, is to find the best way to kill bugs. Which is weird because a lot of the insects that you'll see, and you'll see it prepared in the documentary as well, when people prepare them, they usually cook them live. It's not the same thing as, slaughtering a cow and having it butchered and then storing the meat somewhere for a few days or in some cases a few weeks, and then finally preparing it. These are alive when they're prepared, so I guess there's something to be said for freshness. Anyway, I know I'm sort of all over the place with this, but these are just sort of little topics that I found. You can go up, the majority of this stuff is on Wikipedia anyway. Just information about the amount of land that's used, the amount of protein that you get out of it. That's another thing, too, is that for the amount of work that you put into it, you get a tremendous amount of, for lack of a better term, meat out of it. Much more than you do for cows and pigs and everything else. And some of it is like really, really high up there. Like double digits, percentage-wise, more meat or ratio. So it is something that I think eventually people are going to need to look at. We don't really have to worry about that where we are because, again, we throw out more food than we eat. Almost. Not quite. A lot. But for the vast majority of the world that is still eating eating and preparing, and part of their culture is having these bugs as part of their food. They don't have that same luxury. And of course, there are alarmists who say, well, in 20 years' time, we won't have that either, and we'll have to go to this. I don't know if that's the case because we've been hearing that for a very, very long time. But it's very interesting to watch. Just how, not only just the cultural differences, but just the fact that this might eventually be something that, we are going to have to go to. In which case, maybe we'll start losing some weight because you don't get a lot of, cream-filled bugs. Anyway, so take a look if you want. Again, not really for the squeamish. They do eat a lot of weird things on this. Everything from grasshoppers to cockroaches to spiders, I believe. So if you're a little bit squeamish, you may not want to watch it. But it is very, very interesting. You can go up and take a look at a whole bunch of other information on this as well. It's all over the place. So I'm not going to really put any links in the description or anything, just because there's so much information on it. I will say that there is one or two different companies that are actually starting to use insects in their products. I mean, we've all used it anyway. There's food dye. A lot of that there's a beetle that they use for food dye. So in case you're wondering, anything that I think it's red. I can't remember. I think it's a red dye anyway. There's a specific dye that they still use, basically crushed up beetles. So you've already eaten bugs before anyway. Which reminds me, actually, you've probably eaten many, many more. There is a thing, and I will put a description of this down in I keep saying that, a link down in the description of this. The FDA, just to sort of give you an idea, for those of you that are like, oh, that's disgusting, and it's bad for you, and it'll kill you, and everything else, it's not. The FDA actually doesn't have a rule in there saying, no, you can't have insect parts in food. That's disgusting. There is a minimum acceptable limit. There are things like, I think these numbers are right, in orange juice per liter, or per cup, I think, per 250 ml. No. Anyway, whatever it is, I think it's per liter, that they would say you can have, a maximum of 250 fly eggs or one maggot. In chocolate, it's 60 parts, 60 insect fragments per 100 grams is still acceptable. So pretty much anytime that you eat a chocolate bar or anything else, you're eating little bug parts that are just, whether they've flown in through the factory or they've fallen in out of someone's hair or whatever it is, they regularly test these, and they always, always, always find them. But there's an acceptable limit. And it goes from everything from frozen broccoli to chocolate to milk to just everything. So I will put a link of that in there, just because I found that really, really interesting. And some of the numbers are huge. And these are sort of maximum standards that they would say, okay, you know what? In 100 grams of chocolate, which is not a lot, it's like, well, a chocolate bar, you're allowed to have up to 60 insect parts. And it's just because they're just everywhere. So you're going to run into them. So enjoy your next chocolate bar because you're probably eating bugs, but you're eating less than 60 parts of them. So at least that's good. But I will put that in there. Anyway, I sort of got off track again. I'm all over the place with a lot of the stuff because I'm trying to think of all the little bits of information that I took from this and trying to tie it into this. And again, I know that this is way off as to what we normally do. But again, where it is sort of tied in with food and how, especially with picky eaters, and how, while we have no problems mindlessly eating, chocolate bars or chips or, in some cases, shrimp and lobster and everything else. Shrimp, by the way, is really, really low calorie, like almost non-existent. I think I've talked about that before. We have no problems with those, even though they sort of resemble insects. They are arthropods, they're crustaceans. But the thought of eating something similar that is, in our garden, everyone's just, no. So anyway, they're getting back to what I was originally going to say. There are a couple of companies that have started to use insects in their products, and I can't remember the name of them, but there's one that is using something. It's just called cricket flour, and it is exactly what you think it is. They just pulverize crickets, they dry them out, and then they pulverize them into like a flour, and they use that to make their product. And it's an energy bar or something. Don't worry, it's not something that you like, oh, I didn't know that there were crickets in it. It's like a protein bar, but they're using that instead of whatever they normally put in protein bars. Because it's got very high nutritional value and very low fat, and it's good for you. So, and surprisingly enough, when I ate them anyway, they weren't bitter, which is really what I expected. I expected them to be just, very, very bitter. But I know why, little geckos and lizards like them, because they taste fine. Anyway, I've sort of gone all over the place with this again. I do apologize. But, in short, this is just sort of going to end the week on us talking about weird things that we've eaten and just eating for the sake of eating. It sort of has had that vein in it all the way through. Aside from the announcement yesterday from the FDA, or the 16th, which would be, what did it say? 19th. So Tuesday, I guess. But it does sort of follow in line with all that stuff, just because I think I'd like to sort of tie this all in together, and I don't know if I can. Anyway, the mindless eating is one thing. Just eating food just because it's there, and yet we're still averse to eating bugs. And I get it, because I don't think I could go just to some stand at the city market somewhere and say, oh, I'll have a grasshopper and a cockroach and give me a couple of June bugs to munch along the way. So I do understand that, but I just thought it was kind of interesting to see that contrast for the week. But anyway, I'm rambling again. Sorry. So, go up, take a look at it. Try not to watch it when you're eating, especially if you're eating something crunchy like popcorn, because you're going to think you're eating a bug. But it is very, very interesting. And there are a ton of different documentaries like this, insects as food and things like that, and different cultural foods. And we'll be adding those in there as well. They may not necessarily, like this time, they may not be linked to what we're talking about during the week. They may not be linked to weight loss. They may not be even really linked to health so much. The very first one that we put up there, the man versus food, was just a disgusting eating competition. But I think that you'll enjoy this one. It's really, for those of you out there that find this interesting anyway, it's new knowledge, and it's still sort of related to food. So we're all good. Anyway, I've gone on far too long. I've gone all over the place, and I originally have a path when I start these videos, saying here's where I want to start, here's where I want to finish, and I will tie it all together, and it will make sense. And I don't think I've done that. But you can go watch a guy eat bugs. Have fun. So thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, please poke the like button for me. And in the meantime, keep yourself warm and fuzzy, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.